She was worth $3 billion. He fixed fences for a living, and the whole town was watching to see which one of them would break first. When Ethan Walker showed up on Olivia Sterling's property that morning, he had no idea her son Ryan, his oldest friend, would come home to find them together. No idea that the friendship they'd built over 20 years would combust in under 5 minutes. No idea that he'd have to choose between the man who had his back since they were kids and the woman who had somehow become the reason he got out of bed. Some storms don't come from the sky. If this story already has you, hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. The call came in on a Tuesday, which was already a bad sign. Tuesdays had a way of going sideways on Ethan Walker. His daughter Lily had been born on a Tuesday, premature, undersized, screaming like she had something to prove from the first second of her life. His ex-wife Claire had left on a Tuesday, a note on the kitchen table and a half-empty closet. The transmission on his truck had gone out on a Tuesday last March, costing him $1,100. He didn't really have, and a week of borrowing Dale Pruitt's rusted Ford that smelled like wet dog and gun oil. So when his phone buzzed at 6:47 in the morning and the number on the screen was one he didn't recognize, area code local, but not saved in his contacts, he had a feeling before he even answered. Walker Fence and Repair, he said, the same way he always answered unknown numbers. Keep it professional. His mother had drilled that into him. Mr. Walker. The voice on the other end was female, clipped, the kind of voice that was used to being listened to. This is Sandra Reyes. I manage operations for Sterling Ranch. We had storm damage overnight. Significant section of the east perimeter fence came down along the highway side. We have livestock, and we have a youth riding event scheduled for Saturday. We need someone out here today. Ethan leaned back in his kitchen chair. Through the doorway, he could see Lily's cereal bowl sitting on the counter, half-eaten, the milk gone pale and thin. She'd be at school by now. He had 3 hours before his first scheduled job of the day, a gate repair over on County Road 14. How much fence are we talking? He asked. Roughly 260 feet of split rail along the highway-facing boundary. Some of the posts pulled clean out of the ground. We think the drainage under the embankment shifted. He pulled a notepad toward him. I can be out there by 8:30. Give me the access gate code. There was a brief pause. I'll meet you at the main entrance. Drive past the cattle guard. Follow the gravel road east. You'll see it. He'd been to Sterling Ranch before, though not recently. Done work out there maybe 6-7 years ago when old Gerald Sterling was still alive and running the place himself. A leathery, direct man who paid on time and didn't hover. Since Gerald died, the ranch had passed to his daughter. Ethan had heard she'd moved back from wherever she'd been. New York, maybe, or Houston. He didn't know much about Olivia Sterling beyond what the town said, and what the town said covered a lot of ground, most of it speculative. He finished his coffee, rinsed the mug, and grabbed his keys. The damage was worse than Sandra had described, which happened more often than it didn't when clients were calling from an office and estimating by what they'd been told secondhand. The east perimeter fence had taken a hard hit, not just 260 feet but closer to 320, with a section near the embankment that had essentially folded over onto itself, posts and all, like something had just decided it was done standing. Ethan parked his truck on the gravel shoulder and stood there for a minute, looking at it with his hands on his hips. The morning was already warm, the kind of flat Texas heat that made the air shimmer above the asphalt even before 9. Out past the collapsed fence line, the highway stretched quiet and gray in both directions. It looks worse in person. He turned around. The woman standing behind him was not Sandra Reyes. Sandra had met him at the gate, handed him a laminated site map, and gotten a phone call that pulled her back toward the main house before they'd reached the east boundary. This was someone else. She was about his age, maybe a year or two younger, dark hair pulled back in a way that looked like it had been neat 4 hours ago, wearing jeans and work boots that had actual dirt on them, which meant she'd been out here already this morning. She was holding 2 bottles of water, one of which she held out toward him. Olivia Sterling, she said, not waiting for him to figure it out, not with any particular fanfare, just stating a fact. I know what you're thinking. The drainage did shift. I had someone check the culvert after the storm. We've got water rerouting underground right where the posts anchor, which means you'll have the same problem again next heavy rain if we just reset the posts. He took the water. We'd need to address the drainage first, or at least set the new post with a concrete footing deep enough that it won't matter when the ground moves again. She nodded, not surprised, like she'd already thought of this and was waiting to see if he had too. That's what I figured. Can you do both? I can do the fence. Drainage rerouting is a separate trade. You'd want someone with a backhoe and drainage pipe experience. I have someone for that. I just need to know what the fence requires so I can sequence it correctly. He walked the length of the damage with her, which took 20 minutes. She didn't trail behind him or stand back and watch. She walked beside him, asking specific questions. How deep for the footings? What material for the rail replacement? Whether the corner bracing needed to be rebuilt from scratch or could be reinforced. She listened to his answers without interrupting, and when she pushed back, she did it with reasons, not just opinions. He'd worked for people with 100 times more money than she had who couldn't hold a practical conversation about the thing they'd hired him to fix. That wasn't the case here. I can start today and be through Thursday if the materials come in on time, he told her when they'd reached the far end of the damage. I'll have to order the split rail this morning. Lumberyard on Route 9 usually has my stock pulled same day. Do it, she said. What do you need from me? Access to the water spigot near the barn for mixing, and I'll need to run my truck along the fence line. Your grass is dry enough it won't be an issue. Done. She pulled out her phone, typed something. Sandra will make sure the barnside gate stays unlocked. He should have left it there, started unloading, called the lumberyard. He had a day of work in front of him and no reason to stand in a field making conversation. But he said, you know the fence at this corner post is original, right? Looks like Gerald's work. He used cedar. You can see the grain if you get close enough. Most of what I'll be replacing is pine, but I can source cedar if you want to match it. She looked at the post. Something moved across her face that he couldn't quite read. Yeah, she said. Match it. He worked through this morning without stopping, pulling damaged posts, clearing the folded rail sections, stacking everything that was salvageable to one side. The physical part of fence work suited something in Ethan's brain that hadn't ever found another outlet. The problem was always concrete and visible. The solution was always measurable, and by the end of a day you could see exactly what you'd done. He'd tried explaining that to people before and mostly gotten blank looks. His mother understood it. She'd been a carpenter until her knees gave out. Lily called him at noon, which meant her school lunch break. This was a habit they'd established when she started second grade, mostly because she'd gone through a phase of calling him 11 times a day, and he'd had to negotiate it down to a manageable frequency. Now she called once, at noon, unless something was wrong. Dad, we're doing a science project on tornadoes and I want to build the actual vortex thing where you put 2 bottles together, and 2-liter bottles, little tubing from the hardware store, fill one with water, flip it upside down and tape them together at the neck. There's a YouTube video. I'll find it tonight. You already know how to do it? Made one when I was your age. Did yours work? Eventually. She laughed, that snorty laugh she'd had since she was 3 years old, and he felt the specific warmth that laugh always produced somewhere in the middle of his chest. Okay, bye. Bye, Bug. He was eating a sandwich on the tailgate when he heard boots on gravel and looked up to find Olivia walking back across the field toward him, this time with what appeared to be a second lunch in her hand, a brown paper bag, a thermos. You don't have to, he started. Lupe made extra. She sat on the fence rail opposite him without asking permission, which he noticed. Not in a bad way, just she was comfortable in her own space. Didn't perform being welcome. Lupe's been cooking on this ranch since before I was born. She takes it personally if people don't eat. I have a sandwich. Then you have a sandwich and a bowl of chili. She set the bag down beside him. He ate the chili. It was exceptional. The kind of flavor that took hours and someone who cared. And he said so, and she smiled. And that was more or less when things shifted, though he wouldn't recognize it until later. They talked through lunch without any particular agenda. He asked about the youth riding program. It turned out to be something she'd started herself after taking over the ranch. A partnership with 3 local schools that brought in kids who'd never been near a horse. The logistics were significant: liability, insurance, scheduling around the school calendar, convincing 3 different principals that this was a worthwhile use of a Saturday morning. She'd been working on it for 8 months. How many kids so far? He asked. 63 across the 3 groups. We had a girl last month who'd never left her neighborhood without her mom. She spent the whole first session not getting near the horses at all, just watching. And then on the second session, she walked up to the one we called Juniper. Juniper's old, she's gentle, she's basically a couch with legs. And she just put her hand out. Olivia paused, looking out at the pasture. I had to go stand by the water trough, so no one saw me cry about it. He didn't say anything to that. Sometimes things didn't need a response. Anyway, she said, it matters more to me than almost anything else we're doing here. He believed her. Well, the materials came in that afternoon and he worked until the light started going orange and flat over the western fields. By the time he loaded up his truck, he had 70 feet of new fence in place, solid, the footings set. It looked right, looked like it belonged there. He was about to pull away when Sandra came out to say he'd left his level near the barn, and he looped back around, and that's when he saw Olivia sitting on the fence at the edge of the training paddock, watching two of her ranch hands put the horses in for the night. She wasn't on her phone, she was just watching, the way people only watch things they genuinely loved. He got his level, and he drove home. He didn't think about her on the way home. He picked Lily up from his mother's, made dinner, pasta, the simple kind, nothing ambitious. Helped with the tornado project, got Lily in bed, and sat on his porch until it got too dark to see the yard. He didn't think about her. Day 2 of the fence job was easier than the first, the rhythm established, the hardest section behind him. And Olivia appeared mid-morning again, this time in different boots and a worn canvas jacket, even though it was warm, because the wind off the flatland had a bite to it in the shade. She brought coffee. He stopped fighting the dynamic and just accepted it. Can I ask you something? She said. She was sitting on the tailgate again. It had apparently become her tailgate now, which was fine, and holding her coffee with both hands. Sure. Do you like this? The work? She glanced down the fence line at the posts he'd set yesterday, the new cedar rail catching the morning light. Not as a business thing. Do you actually like it? It was a question that almost no one had ever asked him. Clients asked what he charged. His friends asked how business was. His mother asked if he was eating enough. Nobody really asked if he liked it. Yeah, he said. I like that the problem is real. Something's broken. You fix it. Now it's not. I don't have to wonder if I did it right. I can see it. He tightened a bolt, checked the rail. I like being outside. I'm not good at offices. I spent 4 years in offices, she said. New York. Working for a private equity firm that was technically managing part of our family holdings. I was good at it. I was genuinely good at it. She paused. I hated every day. So why'd you stay 4 years? Because it was expected. Because my father had given me an opportunity and I was going to do something with it. She looked down at her coffee. And because I kept thinking I'd stop hating it if I just got better at it. That's not how it works. No, he agreed. It's not. What made you choose this? She asked. Specifically this. He thought about it honestly instead of giving the easy answer. My dad was a contractor. I grew up on job sites. And then I had Lily when I was 24. Her mother and I weren't in a good place. It fell apart pretty fast. I needed to be able to set my own hours so I could be where she needed me to be. Fence and repair work, you set your schedule. It made sense. How old is she now? 8. Going on 45. A pause. She's the best person I know, which sounds like a thing parents say, but I mean it as an actual assessment. Olivia smiled at that. It was a different smile than the professional one, less guarded, like something she hadn't planned. What's her name? Lily. That's a good name. She chose it herself, he said. Well, her mother and I had a list and Lily was on it, but when we asked her, she was about 3, which name she wanted, she picked Lily. So she gets credit. He hadn't meant to tell that story. He didn't usually tell that story. That's a good way to decide, Olivia said. By Friday, he'd been on the property 4 days running and the fence was done. All 320 feet of it, better than the original, the corner posts anchored in concrete deep enough to outlast both of them. He walked it once in the early morning before Olivia came out, checking everything, because that's what he did. The cedar matched. The rail sat level. He'd fixed a secondary section near the gate that hadn't been part of the original scope because it was clearly going to fail within 6 months, and it bothered him to leave it. She found him at the gate section. This wasn't in the estimate, she said, looking at the new work. No, but it needed doing. She studied it for a long moment. What do I owe you for it? Nothing. It took me an hour. Ethan. Her voice had something in it that was harder to identify. I pay for work done on this property. That's how it works. Then pay me for the original scope, and we'll call the gate section professional courtesy. I'm not going to send you a bill for 1 hour of work when you've been feeding me chili and coffee for 4 days. She looked like she might argue. Then she exhaled. Fine. Fine. They stood at the gate section in the early light, and he could feel it, the weight of the week shifting into something else, the way a conversation does when it stops being about the ostensible subject. The horse trailers were already rolling in for the youth riding event. He could hear Lily's voice in his head without meaning to. Did yours work? And he thought about things working or not working, and about the 4 days he'd spent on this property, and about the way Olivia Sterling laughed when something genuinely caught her off guard, which wasn't often, but was real when it happened. Thank you, she said finally, for the fence, for all of it. That's the job. She looked at him directly. I know that's the job. I'm thanking you anyway. He loaded his tools into the truck, took one last look at the fence line stretching east in the early sun, and drove out through the cattle guard. He thought about her the whole way home. But the youth riding event went well. He heard about it from Dale Pruitt at the hardware store on Monday, who'd heard it from his wife, who volunteered with one of the schools. No incidents, good turnout. The kids who'd never been on a horse were apparently beside themselves with a particular kind of joy that Dale's wife had found moving. Ethan heard this and thought, 63 kids, and thought about Olivia standing by the water trough so no one would see her face. He went back to his regular work. Gate repairs, post replacement, a long stretch of barbed wire on a cattle operation north of town. Ordinary jobs, ordinary days. But Sterling Ranch called again the following Thursday. A section of interior fence near the training paddock had a post that was heaving, frost movement, which was unusual for this time of year but not unheard of, and they'd noticed it during the riding event cleanup. He drove out Friday morning. Olivia was already at the paddock when he arrived, watching one of the horses circle the ring in an easy trot. She turned when she heard his truck, and there was a second, very brief, not dramatic, just a second, where something moved her across her face that she didn't quite manage to keep neutral. You found it fast, he said. I walk the property every morning, she said. My father did too. Old habit I picked up. Good habit. He fixed the post. It took 2 hours. She came and went. She had calls, she had meetings, she had the relentless pull of a billion-dollar operation that didn't pause for anyone. But she came back when he was finishing, and they stood at the paddock fence and watched Juniper, old, gentle Juniper, the horse that was basically a couch with legs, meander along the far rail without any particular purpose. She was my horse, Olivia said. When I was 12, my dad bought her for me. A pause. She's 26 now, retired. She looks good for 26. She's stubborn and opinionated, and she doesn't do anything she doesn't want to do. Olivia patted the rail. I've always liked that about her. Ethan smiled at the ground. Stay for dinner, Olivia said. Not casually. Not, hey, you want to, but directly, the way she said most things. He looked up. She was watching him with an expression that was careful and open at the same time, which he was learning was how she handled things she actually cared about. I have to pick up Lily at 6, he said. 5 o'clock. Lupe will have you out by 5:30. He should have said no. He had a morning job. He was tired. He had practical reasons. All right, he said. Dinner was in the kitchen, not the formal dining room that he'd glimpsed through a doorway once, all dark wood and a table that seated 12, but the actual kitchen, which was large and warm and smelled like coffee, and something braised and had a long wooden table with nicks and scratches in it that told a story of decades of use. Lupe, a small, unhurried woman in her 60s who gave Ethan the specific once-over of someone deciding whether he was worth feeding, set 2 plates down and disappeared without ceremony. The meal was a kind of beef stew that made his previous understanding of beef stew feel embarrassing. They talked for 2 hours without noticing. He told her about Lily's tornado project and the 2-liter bottle vortex, which worked on the 3rd try. She told him about the first board meeting she'd run after her father died, 19 men in suits looking at her like they were waiting for her to fail, and how she'd spent the night before preparing until 2 in the morning and walked in and presented for 45 minutes without a single note. He told her about the 6 months after Claire left, when he'd held the business together on 3 hours of sleep a night and made Lily's lunches in a fog. She told him about the relationship she'd had in New York for 2 years that had turned out to be mostly two people who needed each other for the wrong reasons. He wanted the Sterling name more than he wanted me, she said. Not bitter. She'd been over it for a while, just honest. I figured it out too slowly. That was my fault. I was paying attention to the wrong things. That's not a fault, Ethan said. That's being human. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't translate. You're very matter-of-fact about things. Does that bother you? No, she said. It's actually... She stopped. No, it doesn't bother me. He drove home with the windows down in the early evening air, and Lily was at his mother's being loudly wrong about something involving dinosaurs, and he picked her up and got her home and into the bath and into bed, and then he sat on the porch again. He thought about Olivia Sterling for a long time. It kept happening. That was the honest truth of it. It wasn't a single decision or a single moment, but a slow accumulation of return trips, invented reasons, and mutual willingness. There was always something at the ranch that needed attention, or there was a community event that put them in the same room, or he came out to consult on a drainage question and stayed 3 hours. The town noticed. Small towns always did. He heard the observations secondhand, from Dale, from his mother, from his buddy Marcus over a beer on a Wednesday night. People are saying you're spending a lot of time at Sterling Ranch, Marcus said. I do a lot of work there. Marcus looked at him the way old friends looked at you when they were deciding how direct to be. Just work? Ethan turned his beer bottle in his hands. It's complicated. Is it, though? He didn't answer. The truth was that nothing had been stated or declared or named. Nothing had happened that could be defined. They were friends, if that was even the right word, who had built something unexpected out of a fence repair and 4 days of cedar posts and coffee. They talked on the phone sometimes, at odd hours, about nothing in particular and everything that mattered. He'd brought Lily out to the ranch one Saturday, and she had stood in the paddock with Juniper's enormous nose pressed against her shoulder and looked up at Olivia with round, serious eyes and said, Is this your horse? And Olivia had said, She was. Now she just does what she wants. And Lily had nodded like this was a philosophy she respected. He'd watched Olivia watch Lily and felt something pull tight in his chest. I was at the hardware store in town, early Thursday, picking up anchoring hardware for a job, when he ran into Ryan Sterling for the first time in about 8 months. Ryan was 2 years younger than Ethan. They'd been friends since middle school, the kind of friendship built on shared land and shared machinery and the specific bond of growing up in a small town and deciding to be decent to each other. Ryan had been away, Houston, mostly, working in commercial real estate development, and Ethan had heard he'd been having some disagreements with his mother about the direction of the ranch. Walker. Ryan clapped him on the shoulder, grinning. He looked tired, but he always looked tired. It was just how Ryan was. Heard you've been doing work out at the property. Some fence, drainage stuff. Good property to work on. Tell me about it. Ryan picked up a box of lag screws, turned it over in his hand without looking at it. I'm heading back out there this weekend. Got some things to talk through with my mom. Oh yeah? He kept his voice easy. The East Corridor, Ryan said. There's a developer out of Dallas who's serious about it. Good money. Mom's been resistant, but I think she just needs to see the actual numbers. Ethan didn't say anything to that. It wasn't his ranch. We should get a beer while I'm in town, Ryan said. He'd set the lag screws down without buying them. Catch up properly. Sure, Ethan said. He drove out to the ranch that afternoon. He'd been planning to. He had a quote to drop off for some additional paddock work, but he drove a little faster than he needed to. Olivia was on the phone when he arrived, standing on the porch with that particular stillness she had when she was listening to something she didn't agree with. She held up one finger when she saw him, and he leaned against his truck and waited, and watched her face cycle through several things she didn't say out loud. She hung up and exhaled once, sharply, through her nose. Ryan called, she said. He's in town. I ran into him at the hardware store this morning. Something moved in her expression. Did he say anything? That he's coming out this weekend, and that the developer from Dallas is serious. She sat down on the porch steps. It was the first time he'd ever seen her sit like that. Just sit, without agenda, like her legs had decided that was enough for a moment. The East Corridor is 400 acres of original family land. My great-grandfather broke that ground. My father ran cattle on it for 30 years. She looked at the middle distance. Ryan has a financial case. His numbers aren't wrong. It's genuinely valuable land. A pause. But you can't put a number on some things and expect the number to mean anything. He sat down beside her on the steps. He didn't overthink it. He'll push hard, she said quietly. Ryan doesn't do things gently. No, Ethan agreed. He doesn't. She turned her head and looked at him, and they were closer than they'd been before, and neither of them moved. The afternoon light was going golden and flat, the way it did out here in the hour before evening settled in, and somewhere across the field Juniper was making her slow way toward the water trough. Ethan, Olivia said, quietly, like his name was something she'd been thinking about. He met her eyes and held them. I know, he said, just that. She nodded, looked back out at the field. They sat there together as the light changed, and for a moment the whole complicated weight of what was happening, the ranch, Ryan, the town, the gap between her world and his, was just present between them, acknowledged without either of them having to name it, and neither of them moved, and neither of them wanted to. He picked Lily up at 6. She was full of opinions about a book they'd been reading at school, a chapter book about a girl who builds a boat, and she talked about it the whole way home with the focused intensity she brought to things she genuinely loved. He made dinner, he helped her practice her spelling words. He got her to bed. He sat on the porch. He thought about the way Olivia said his name like it was a question she already knew the answer to. He thought about Ryan's easy grin at the hardware store. He thought about the East Corridor, 400 acres, original family land. He thought about the fence he'd built along the highway, the cedar posts that would outlast both of them, the concrete footings going down past the frost line, the rail sitting true and level in the morning light. Some things you built to last. You could see it when you'd done it right. He was starting to understand what that meant in a context that had nothing to do with fences. The night air was warm and still, and across town somewhere Olivia Sterling was probably sitting with her own version of a porch, thinking her own version of thoughts, and the distance between their two worlds felt for the first time like something that could be crossed. He didn't know yet what was coming. He would. Ryan Sterling showed up on a Saturday morning the way he did most things, without warning and with full confidence that his arrival would be welcome. Ethan heard about it from Olivia that same afternoon. He'd been at a post-setting job east of town when his phone buzzed, and he almost let it go to voicemail, but he didn't. He's here, she said. That was it, just those 2 words, and he understood everything in them. How is he? Cheerful. A pause. He brought a folder. Ethan set down his post driver. A folder. Printed materials, projected revenue, comparable sales, development timeline. He did a presentation, Ethan, at the kitchen table, with page numbers. He breathed out slowly. What did you say? I let him finish. Then I told him I needed time to think. Her voice was careful, the way it got when she was managing something. He's staying through the week. He wants to take me to dinner in town tomorrow and keep talking about it. Are you going to go? He's my son. As if that settled the question. Yes, I'm going. There was a silence between them that had more in it than either of them chose to address directly. Ryan didn't know. Ryan had no reason to know because nothing had been stated and nothing had been named, not officially, not even between the two of them. But Ethan had spent the better part of 3 weeks finding reasons to be on that property, and Olivia had spent those same 3 weeks finding reasons to let him, and they both understood that the arrival of Ryan Sterling had introduced a pressure that hadn't existed before. Okay, Ethan said. Call me if you need to. I will. Another pause. Thank you. He went back to the post, drove it 4 inches deeper than he needed to. He didn't hear from her for 3 days, which he expected and also found harder than he'd anticipated. He stayed busy. There was always work. A rancher on the north side needed a complete pasture partition done before his cattle got back from summer grazing, which was a week of full days. Lily had a school presentation about the water cycle that required parental attendance on Tuesday morning, and he sat in a plastic chair sized for an 8-year-old and watched her explain evaporation with a confidence that made the other parents laugh and the teacher look quietly relieved. His mother called twice asking about nothing in particular, which meant she was asking about everything in particular, and he deflected both times. Marcus texted on Wednesday. People are talking more, just so you know. He put his phone face down on the workbench and left it there. The thing about small towns. And Ethan had lived in this one his entire life, knew its rhythms the way he knew how to read weather, was that gossip had a texture to it. There was the ordinary kind, harmless, the churn of people with too much proximity and too little novelty. And then there was the other kind, the kind with teeth, that attached itself to situations involving money or class, or someone stepping outside what people had decided was their lane. He'd felt that second kind starting to form around the edges of things. At the hardware store, at the diner where he sometimes grabbed lunch, a certain quality of pause before conversation resumed when he walked in somewhere. He wasn't ashamed. That was the thing he kept coming back to. He went through the checklist of things he might feel: embarrassed, overreaching, foolish, and none of them landed. What he felt was something quieter and more stubborn, like the conviction you had when you'd set a post right. You just knew. Olivia called Thursday night, late, after Lily was in bed. "Ryan's pushing the dinner conversation into something I didn't agree to," she said without preamble. He'd come to appreciate that about her. No small talk when she had something real to say. He invited a contact from the Dallas Development Group. I didn't know until we sat down. At the restaurant? He thought I'd be more receptive with the actual financials on the table in person, or he thought I'd be too polite to walk out. A beat. I didn't walk out. I sat there for an hour and a half. Did it change anything? No. Flat. Certain. The numbers are real. The money is real. I understand all of it. It's still not something I'm willing to do. What did you tell them? That I needed more time, which Ryan interprets as a negotiating position. She exhaled. It's not a negotiating position. I'm not going to sell it. I don't have the energy tonight to have the full conversation again about why. He leaned back in his chair. Outside, the night was very still, the kind of quiet that settled over the flat land after 10 o'clock when the wind died. You don't have to explain it to me, he said. I already know why. The silence that came after that was different from the ones they usually had. Softer. Ethan. Her voice had dropped slightly. What are we doing? He considered the easy exits, the things he could say that would keep everything comfortable and undefined. He chose not to take them. I think you know what we're doing. I do, she said. That's why I'm asking. Ryan's in town. I know that too. He rubbed the back of his neck. The honest answer sat there in his chest, not uncomfortable exactly, just weighty. True things usually were. I'm not going to pretend the last 3 weeks have been just work, he said. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm not going to pretend. A pause. He could hear her breathe. Okay, she said finally. Quiet. Okay. They talked for another hour about nothing, about the youth writing group's next session, about Lily's water cycle presentation, about a book Olivia had started and couldn't get into, about whether the flat land looked different at night when you'd grown up somewhere with more trees. It was the kind of conversation that had no purpose except that they both wanted to still be talking. He went to bed at midnight feeling, despite everything, like something had settled. The following Saturday, Ethan brought Lily out to the ranch on a loose pretext. He'd gotten a call about a split rail near the eastern water trough that he'd noticed on his last visit, and he figured he'd take a quick look while Lily got some time around the horses. His mother thought he was doing a job. He didn't correct her. Lily had been asking about the horses since the first visit. She talked about Juniper with a specificity that suggested she'd been thinking about her regularly, referring to her by name in contexts that had nothing to do with horses. Do you think Juniper would like dogs? She'd asked one morning over breakfast, entirely without setup. Ryan was out on the property somewhere when they arrived. Ethan saw his truck near the barn, but didn't see him directly, which was fine. The morning was overcast, the kind of flat gray Texas sky that could go either way. Burn off by noon or build into something. Olivia met them at the paddock looking like she'd been awake since 5, which she probably had, in jeans with a tear at the left knee and her hair doing its 4 hours ago thing. Lily walked straight up to her with the directness that 8-year-olds had not yet been socialized out of. Can I see Juniper? Olivia looked at her seriously. Yes, but you have to let her come to you. You don't go to her. How do I make her come to me? You stand still and you wait. She'll decide. Lily considered this with a slight frown. How long? Could be 2 minutes? Could be 20? What if I get bored? Then you practice not being bored. Olivia's expression was very grave, but her eyes weren't. It's a useful skill. Lily appeared to file this away as reasonable. They went to the paddock. Ethan fixed the rail. It took 40 minutes, and spent the other 40 minutes watching his daughter stand in a paddock with her arms loose at her sides, perfectly, stubbornly still, waiting for a 26-year-old horse to decide she was worth approaching. Juniper took 11 minutes. Lily didn't move a muscle the entire time. When the horse finally walked up and dropped her nose against Lily's shoulder, the look on Lily's face was the specific expression of a person who has just understood something important about how patience works. He became aware of Olivia standing beside him at the rail. He hadn't heard her come back. "She's got something," Olivia said quietly, watching Lily. "Yeah," he said, "she does." They stood there in the gray morning light, shoulders not quite touching, watching his daughter stand motionless in a paddock, with her hand against the neck of a horse that had belonged to Olivia when she was 12, and neither of them said anything more, because there wasn't anything to say that the moment hadn't already said better. That was when Ryan found them. He came around the side of the barn with his phone in his hand and his boots loud on the gravel, and he stopped when he saw Ethan at the rail. The expression on his face cycled through several things quickly. Surprise first, then something that took a beat longer to identify. "Walker." His voice was neutral. "Didn't know you were coming out today." "Split rail repair near the trough," Ethan said. "Just wrapping up." Ryan looked from him to Olivia. It wasn't a long look, but it was a specific one. "Mom." "He called yesterday," Olivia said evenly. "I asked him to come by." Something tightened in Ryan's jaw, barely visible, the kind of thing you only caught if you knew someone well enough to read the small tells. Ethan knew Ryan's tells. They'd spent years building fence together as teenagers, arguing over truck repairs, doing the particular kind of work that gave you a thorough catalog of another person's habits. "Right," Ryan said. Then, to Ethan, with a friendliness that was genuine enough but had something careful underneath it. "You want to grab lunch in town? Haven't had a chance to catch up properly." Ethan looked at Lily in the paddock. "I've got Lily." "She can come, she can have a burger." Ryan smiled, the easy Ryan smile. "Relax, man, it's just lunch." It was just lunch. And it also wasn't just lunch, and all three of them standing at that fence rail understood it wasn't just lunch, and the distance between what was being said and what was actually happening in that moment was the exact kind of gap that Ethan had spent his whole adult life being bad at navigating gracefully. "Sure," he said. Lunch was at the diner on Main, a booth by the window, Lily sitting beside Ethan with a chocolate milkshake and the focused attention of someone who had identified that the adults were talking about something they weren't fully explaining. She was perceptive that way. She got it from her mother, Ethan thought, though he tried not to think about Claire more than necessary. Ryan was good company. He always had been. That was part of what made him Ryan. He had a natural ease with people, a rhythm to conversation that made even uncomfortable things feel temporary. He asked about Lily's school, which Lily answered with the full unfiltered account that only children and certain adults would ever offer. He asked about Marcus and Dale and Ethan's mother. He talked about Houston with a complicated energy, the way people talked about places they'd left without fully deciding to leave. "I've been thinking about coming back," Ryan said eventually, over his coffee. "More permanently." "Yeah?" Ethan kept his voice level. "The development deal makes sense beyond just the financial piece. If it goes through, there's a management role that would keep me involved, working out of here instead of Houston." He wrapped his hands around his mug. "It's time, I think. I've been away long enough." Ethan nodded. Lily was constructing something elaborate out of straw wrappers and had largely left the conversation. "She talked to you about it?" Ryan asked. "The East Corridor." He met Ryan's eyes. "Some." "And?" "It's not my ranch, Ryan." "No," Ryan said. "It's not." A pause that had more architecture to it than the words. "But you've been out there a lot." "Work." Sure. Ryan looked out the window at the street, then back. He wasn't hostile, that wasn't his style, not directly, not yet. But the architecture of the pause had said what he hadn't said, and they both knew it. "She's under a lot of pressure, more than she lets on. I want to make sure the people around her understand that." It was a gentle shot, phrased as concern. Ethan recognized it for what it was. "Ryan." He kept his voice even, The way he kept it even when he was setting a post in ground that was harder than it should be. I think you know me well enough to say whatever you're actually trying to say. Ryan looked at him for a long moment, then he picked up his coffee. Not yet, he said. I don't think I'm ready to have that conversation yet. He almost managed to make it sound casual. Lily looked up from her straw wrapper construction. Dad, can I get pie? What kind? Apple. Yeah, Bug, you can get pie. The thing about feelings you hadn't named was that they didn't stay unnamed. They just gathered weight until the naming happened on its own. Ethan came to understand, over the 10 days that followed Ryan's return, that what had been growing between him and Olivia had become something he could no longer describe to himself as uncertain or unformed. He thought about her with a consistency and a specificity that had nothing to do with the ranch or with work. Thought about the way she frowned slightly when she was listening hard. Thought about the particular quality of her attention when she asked you something she genuinely wanted to know the answer to. Thought about her sitting on the porch steps that afternoon with her legs going out from under her, and the small, sharp exhale she'd made, and the way he'd sat down beside her without thinking about it, because where else would he sit? He didn't say any of this out loud to anyone. Marcus knew enough. His mother knew more than she let on, probably. The town thought it knew what it knew, which was mostly wrong in the details, and basically right in the broad strokes. What he didn't know was what Ryan actually knew. That question had an answer that was coming toward him whether he wanted it or not. Olivia called him on a Wednesday evening. He could hear from her voice that something had shifted. Ryan saw something, she said. He waited. He came back to the house early this afternoon. I was on the phone with you. A beat. He heard enough. Ethan sat down on the porch steps. The evening air was warm, still carrying the day's heat. What did he say? Not much, that night. He went quiet, which is worse than if he'd just said something. Her voice was careful in the way that meant she was managing more than she was showing. He asked me this morning if there was something going on between us. What did you tell him? That it was complicated. A short pause. Which was probably the wrong word to use with Ryan. He doesn't do well with complicated. It sounds to him like I'm hiding something. Are you? The question landed between them. I'm not hiding, she said slowly. I haven't known what to call it. That's not the same thing as hiding. No, he agreed. It's not. He's angry, she said. Not loud angry, cold angry. He cleaned up the barn for 2 hours this afternoon, which is what he does when he's processing. She almost laughed, but didn't. He used to do it as a teenager, anytime my father and he had a fight. He'd just find something physical to destroy productively. Ethan thought about Ryan at the diner. Not yet. I don't think I'm ready to have that conversation yet. It turned out Ryan hadn't needed to be ready. The conversation had arrived on its own. What do you need? He asked. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know what the right move is. Does there have to be a right move? There's always a right move. I run a billion-dollar operation. I believe in right moves. A pause. I just can't always find them when they involve people I care about. He held on to that last part quietly, tucking it somewhere. Ethan. Her voice was lower now. Are you okay with this? All of it, because it's a lot. Ryan, the town, all of it. I don't expect, Olivia. He said it gently but clearly, cutting off the spiral before it could build momentum. I'm not going anywhere. The silence after that was the kind you could settle into. Okay, she said. Quiet. The same word as last time, carrying the same weight. They stayed on the phone another half hour talking around the edges of everything. The youth group's upcoming Saturday session, Lily's obsession with the tornado vortex she'd rebuilt twice, and was now planning a third iteration of whether the gray sky that had been sitting over the county all week was going to finally break into something. Small things. The kind of conversation that was really about one thing, that they were still there, still choosing to be there, still on the line. He went inside eventually and made tea he didn't really want and stood at the kitchen window looking at the dark yard. Ryan Sterling was going to have that conversation whether he was ready or not. The East Corridor deal was still on the table, unmoved. The town was still watching and drawing its own conclusions. None of that had shifted. But something had, in the quiet of that phone call. Something had settled between them that wasn't fragile. that didn't depend on everything going right, or everyone approving, or the situation resolving itself cleanly. He'd built enough fences to know that the posts that held weren't the ones you set in easy ground. They were the ones you drove into the hard places, where the soil pushed back, where you had to go deeper than felt necessary. You went deeper anyway, because that was the only way anything lasted. He saw Olivia in person 2 days later, not at the ranch but at the feed co-op on the south edge of town, which meant they'd arrived by coincidence and both knew it, and pretended otherwise for about 30 seconds before abandoning the pretense. She looked tired. Not the functional tired of early mornings and long days, but the other kind. The tired that came from carrying things you couldn't set down. Ryan confronted me last night, she said quietly, turning a bag of grain supplement in her hands without buying it. He said he thinks I'm being manipulated. The word landed and sat there. He said that, Ethan said. Flat. He doesn't mean it as an insult to you exactly. He means he thinks I'm lonely and someone's filling that space and I'm not thinking clearly. She put the supplement back on the shelf. His words. Ethan was quiet for a moment, working through the clean anger that had risen in his chest and deciding what to do with it. What did you say? I told him that I was a 30-year-old adult who had been running a billion-dollar company for 4 years and that I was capable of determining my own emotional state. Her chin had a particular set to it, and that if he genuinely believed I was too naive to understand my own life, that was a conversation I was willing to have, but he should be prepared for my full, honest response. He almost laughed. How did that go? He cleaned the barn again. A pause. A second time, in 2 days, I'm starting to worry about the structural integrity of the building. This time he did laugh. And after a second she did too, a real one, the unguarded kind, and the tiredness in her face shifted into something else for just a moment. Something lighter, something that looked like relief. They stood in the feed co-op aisle with the afternoon light coming through the high windows and the smell of hay and grain around them, and the particular smallness of a town wrapped around them, watching and noting everything. He didn't care. She didn't care. That, he thought, was probably its own kind of answer. The confrontation didn't come the way Ethan expected it to. He'd been bracing for something direct. Ryan had always been direct when he finally got there, even if he took his time arriving. A phone call, maybe. Or Ryan showing up at his house the way he used to in high school when he had something on his mind and couldn't sit still with it. What Ethan hadn't expected was to walk into it at the Callaway Ranch supply auction on a Friday morning, in front of approximately 40 people he'd known his entire life. He'd gone for the fencing hardware. The Callaway estate was liquidating and the stock was good, cedar posts and galvanized wire at reasonable prices. He was working through a crowded row of pallets near the back when he heard Ryan's voice, closer than he'd expected, and turned to find him 3 feet away with 2 of the Pruitt brothers standing nearby and the particular quality of attention that a small group of people gave to a conversation they weren't officially part of. Walker. Ryan's voice was even. He had a coffee in one hand and his jaw had the tight look Ethan had learned to read over 20 years. Didn't know you'd be here. Same auction list everyone gets, Ethan said. Ryan looked at him for a beat too long. The Pruitt brothers were suddenly very interested in a coil of wire. Can we talk? Ryan said. Sure. They moved to the edge of the lot, away from the pallets and the people, and stood in the partial shade of a livestock trailer that smelled like hay and old metal. The morning was already warm, the sky a flat blue with no give in it. Ryan didn't waste time. I'm going to say this straight because I think you'd rather I did. I would. I know there's something going on between you and my mother. He said it without heat, which was almost harder to deal with than if he'd been loud about it. And I'm not going to pretend I'm okay with it. Ethan let the words land without reacting. Okay. Don't do that. Ryan's jaw tightened. Don't just... Okay, I've known you 20 years, Ethan. 20 years. You fixed fence with me and my dad. You were at the funeral. You know what this family has been through. I do. Then you know this is... Ryan stopped, pressed his mouth together. She's in a vulnerable position. She's been running that ranch alone for 4 years. She's under pressure from every direction. She's isolated out there. And you've been... He stopped again. I'm not saying you're doing it on purpose. The restraint in that last sentence cost Ryan something. Ethan could see that. He was trying to be fair. The trying made it worse somehow. Ryan, Ethan said carefully, I'm going to tell you what I told her, so there's no version of this where you heard something different from each of us. Nothing about this was planned. It wasn't a strategy. I went out there to fix a fence. And now I care about her. He said it plainly because that was the only way to say it. I didn't decide to. It just happened, and I'm not going to apologize for it. Ryan stared at him. A muscle in his jaw moved. You care about her, he repeated slowly. That's what you're going with. It's the truth. The truth. Ryan laughed once, short and humorless. Ethan, come on. She's worth... Do you have any idea what... I know what she's worth. The words came out with more edge than he'd intended, and he let them stand. I've known since the first conversation we had. It didn't make a difference. That's easy to say. Ryan. It's easy to say and hard to prove. Ryan's voice had risen slightly. He caught himself, looked around, brought it back down. I've seen this before. People around serious money, they tell themselves stories. They believe the stories. That doesn't make the stories true. The cold anger came back, the same as in the feed store. Ethan breathed through it. You're talking about me like I'm a stranger. I'm talking about you like a man who's been spending a lot of time on my mother's property and has nothing to show for it financially, which means either you're the most charitable fence repair person in Texas or there's something else going on. I charge standard rates. That's not... Ryan exhaled sharply. That's not what I mean. I know what you mean. Ethan held his ground. You mean you don't believe it's possible that I just like her? That it doesn't have to be more complicated than that? Ryan looked at him for a long moment, and what was in his face was more complicated than anger. There was something underneath it, something that looked like being genuinely afraid of the wrong answer. She's my mother, Ryan said quietly. She spent 4 years holding that ranch together after my dad died, after I left, mostly alone. And I wasn't... He stopped, started again. I wasn't there the way I should have been. I know that. And now there's this... He gestured vaguely between them. And I don't know what it is, and she won't tell me what it is, and I just... He stopped talking. Ethan understood then that this wasn't entirely about him. That was maybe the most important thing he'd understood all morning. Ryan, he said, quieter now. She's fine. She's stronger than either of us. I know she's strong. Rough. I know that better than you do. Then trust that. Ryan looked at him for another long beat. Then he looked away, out at the flat parking lot, the rows of trailers, the people moving between pallets in the morning heat. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with this morning. I need you to step back, Ryan said finally. I'm asking you. Give her space and give me time to... He rubbed the back of his neck. I need time to figure out what's happening here before it goes any further. Ethan considered it. Actually considered it, because Ryan had earned that much. No, he said. Ryan looked back at him. I'm not doing that, Ethan said. Not because I'm trying to disrespect you, but because that's her decision, not yours, and not mine either, honestly. The air between them had a particular quality now. 20 years of friendship in it, and something that could break all of it, and neither of them quite reaching for the break yet. Then we've got a problem, Ryan said. Yeah, Ethan said. I know. He bought the cedar posts and loaded his truck and drove away, and the whole drive home the conversation replayed with the particular stuck record quality of things that hadn't resolved and weren't going to quickly. Olivia found out about it by the end of the day, the way news traveled in that town, through 3 people and 2 phone calls before it came to her directly. She called Ethan that evening, and he could hear something in her voice that was different from the careful management of the previous weeks. Tell me what he said, she said. He told her. All of it, including the parts that were hard to say. Ryan's concern about vulnerability, about isolation, about money. He didn't sand it down. When he finished, there was a silence. He thinks I can't take care of myself, she said. Flat. He's scared, Ethan said. He dressed it up in a lot of different clothes, but that's what's underneath it. Being scared doesn't give him the right to... She stopped. He actually said vulnerable. He said it carefully. I don't care how carefully he said it. Her voice had an edge in it he hadn't heard directed at him before, and he realized quickly that it wasn't directed at him. I have been running 12,000 acres, 200 head of cattle, a staff of 23, and a program for 63 kids for 4 years. alone. And he walks back in here with a folder and a developer contact and tells me I'm vulnerable. I know. I love him, she said. I want to be clear about that because it matters. I love him, and he is my son, and I would do almost anything for him. A pause. But I'm not going to let him draw a line around my life and tell me what's inside it. I didn't think you would. Good. She exhaled. The edge softened slightly, not gone, but controlled. I'm going to talk to him tomorrow morning, before he has a chance to build more material. Do you want me to? No, this is between him and me first. A pause. Thank you for telling me everything. Most people would have smoothed it over. You asked for everything. I know. That's why I asked you. Whatever that conversation looked like the next morning, Olivia didn't give him the details, and he didn't push for them. What he knew was that Ryan didn't leave, which he'd half expected, and that the property had a different quality to it when Ethan drove out that Wednesday to look at a drainage issue near the south paddock. Quieter. The specific quiet of a house where people were being careful around each other. He saw Ryan from a distance, near the horse barn, and Ryan saw him. They didn't wave. They didn't not wave. They existed in the same space with a mutual acknowledgement that the friendship they'd had was currently sitting in pieces on the floor, and neither of them had decided yet whether to pick them up. Ethan did his work. An hour, 90 minutes. Sandra signed his work order. He was walking back to his truck when Olivia caught him near the gate. He pushed the developer meeting again, she said without setup. Yesterday. He's scheduled a call with them for Friday, and he wants me on it. Are you going to be? I told him I'd listen. I didn't tell him I'd agree. She looked worn, the way people looked when they'd been having the same argument from different angles for days without resolution. He's not wrong about the numbers, Ethan. I want to be honest about that. The East Corridor would sell for something that would clear the ranch's debt completely and fund the riding program for 15 years. He leaned against his truck. But it's 400 acres. It's the original section. My grandfather broke that ground with a horse-drawn plow in 1951. She looked out at the property. If I sell it, the ranch becomes something different. I don't know how to explain that to someone who sees a number and thinks the number is the whole answer. Ryan grew up on this land, Ethan said. He knows what it is. He knows what it was. She turned back. He's been gone a long time. You can love a place from a distance and still not fully understand what you're selling. Ethan thought about that. What do you need me to do? She looked at him with an expression that was complicated and direct at the same time. I need you to just keep being what you are. I know that sounds like nothing, but right now everything around me has an agenda, and you're the only person who doesn't seem to. He held her gaze. I have an agenda. What is it? You. Simple. Something shifted in her face, not softening exactly, more like a wall that had been doing its job, deciding it could take a small break. She reached out and put her hand briefly on his forearm, just for a second, a contact that was small and mattered more than its size suggested. Friday, she said. The call is at 2. You don't need to be here, but... A pause. Don't be unreachable. I won't be. The call happened. Ethan was at a job site and kept his phone in his shirt pocket instead of his truck. She didn't call at 2 or at 3, which meant it was running long, or she didn't need him yet. At 4:15, his phone buzzed. He stepped away from the post he was setting. It was a harder call than I expected, she said. Her voice was even, but he'd learned to read beneath the evenness. They brought in their senior acquisition person. The offer went up. How much? She told him. The number was significant even to someone who didn't think in those scales. Ryan's asking me to take the weekend to think about it. He thinks I'm saying no out of sentiment and not strategy. A pause. He might not be entirely wrong. Is that what you think? I think... She stopped, started again. I think sentiment can be a strategy. I think some things that look like sentiment from the outside are actually values, and values are how you make decisions when the numbers run in every direction at once. Her voice was careful, like she was working it out while she said it. But I'm not sure Ryan has the vocabulary for that argument right now. You could make it anyway. I've been making it for 2 weeks. Tired. At some point, you run out of new ways to say the same thing. He pulled the truck door open and sat down sideways in the cab. Olivia, is there anything in you that's actually considering it? The pause was longer than he expected. There's a version of me that knows what the responsible answer is, she said slowly. Clear the debt, fund the program, build a sustainable operation. My father would have understood that argument. A beat. But my father also drove that fence line in a pickup truck every single morning until he couldn't drive anymore. And he never once talked about it like it was an asset. He talked about it like it was a thing that was alive. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then you already know what you're going to do. Knowing and deciding are different things when your son is looking at you like you're choosing a memory over his future. Is that what he said? Not in those words, but that's what he meant. She exhaled. He's going to stay. He told me that yesterday. He wants to be here and manage the development deal, and he sees it as his stake in what we're building. And I want him here. I've wanted him back for 4 years. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, a tiny fracture she covered immediately. I just don't want this to be the price of it. He didn't have an answer for that. There wasn't a clean answer. He sat in his truck cab in the afternoon heat and let her sit with it too, and neither of them tried to fix what wasn't fixable from a phone call. The town had opinions, as towns did. He heard the specific version circulating at the hardware store when he went in Thursday morning, and Dale Pruitt's older brother Gary gave him a look that had a lot of content in it. At the diner, May Calloway, who was in her 70s and had known Ethan since he was born, and had the local habit of saying exactly what she thought to anyone within earshot, stopped him on his way to the counter and said, in the tone of someone delivering news to someone who hadn't heard it, "People are talking, Ethan Lee Walker." "I know," he said. "Some of them are saying things that aren't kind." "I figured." She studied him for a moment with eyes that had seen 6 decades of this town and its patterns. "You doing okay?" "I'm fine, May." She nodded slowly. "She seems like a good woman. The Sterling girl. My granddaughter was in that writing program." She patted his arm once firmly, like she was checking the material. "People need something to talk about. Don't let it change anything." He thanked her and ordered his coffee. The thing was, he'd expected the talk to bother him more than it did. He'd run through it in advance, the way you ran through difficult things in advance trying to prepare, and he'd anticipated a kind of shame or self-consciousness that hadn't arrived. What he felt instead was something simpler and more durable, just the knowledge of what was true and what wasn't, and the understanding that people's opinions about his life had never once fixed a fence, or fed his daughter, or mattered in any way that held up at the end of the day. He carried that with him, and it was enough. What wasn't enough was the situation with Ryan, which was sitting between him and Olivia like a piece of damaged fence neither of them had found a way to fix yet. Not broken all the way through, it hadn't reached that, but stressed, post-listing, rails starting to separate from the bracket. The kind of damage that asked you honestly whether you were going to address it or just watch it get worse. It came apart on a Thursday night, 9 days after the auction lot conversation. Ethan hadn't planned to be at the ranch that evening. He'd been driving back from a job site north of town when Olivia called and said Ryan had just told her he'd contacted the developers directly, without her approval, to extend the timeline negotiation. He'd told them she was still considering. He'd given them the impression of a flexibility she hadn't authorized. "He went around you," Ethan said. "Yes." Her voice was very controlled in the way that meant she was furious. "Are you at the house?" "Yes, Ryan's here. We haven't talked yet. I've been on the phone with Sandra and our legal contact for the last 40 minutes. A pause. "I'm not asking you to come over." "But," a breath. "But I'd feel better if you weren't 40 minutes away." He was there in 25. Ryan's truck was in the drive. The lights in the main house were on. He parked and walked to the front porch, and Olivia opened the door before he knocked, which meant she'd been watching for his headlights. She looked like someone who had been holding something very heavy for a long time and was deciding whether to put it down or throw it. Her eyes were clear, not red. She hadn't been crying, she'd been angry, which was its own thing. "He's in the living room," she said quietly. Ryan appeared in the hallway before they'd made it through the entryway. He looked at Ethan with an expression that moved through several stages. Surprise, then something that closed down fast into something harder. "I didn't know you were coming," Ryan said. "I called him," Olivia said. Ryan looked at her. "Of course you did." "Ryan." "No." His voice was sharp now, the careful evenness gone. He looked at Ethan directly. "This is a family matter." What you did today is a business matter, Olivia said. You contacted Sterling Ranch's legal counterpart without my authorization. That's not a family matter, Ryan. That's a breach of... I was trying to keep the deal alive because you're letting sentiment kill an opportunity that would change this ranch's position entirely. His voice was rising. I'm trying to help you. You went behind my back because talking to you frontally hasn't worked. He turned to Ethan, and now the 20-year friendship and the new anger were right up against each other in his face. And you, he pointed once, not aggressive, but not gentle. You've been out here. You've had her ear for weeks, and I don't know what you've been saying, but she was never this dug in on the East Corridor before you started. That's enough. Olivia's voice cut clean. Mom. Ryan. Her voice was low and absolutely certain. I have been running this ranch for 4 years. The East Corridor decision is mine. It was mine before Ethan Walker ever set foot on this property, and it will be mine regardless of what either of you says to me. And what you did today? Going to those developers without my authorization? That is not something I can overlook. That's not something a son does to his mother. That's not something a business partner does to the person who holds the deed. The room was very quiet. Ryan's face had gone somewhere Ethan hadn't seen it go before. Not just angry now, something rawer underneath it. His jaw worked once. I thought I was doing what was best for us. I know you did. Her voice had softened by 1 degree, not in defeat, but in the specific way of someone who loved a person and was still holding the line. I believe that. And you're still wrong. A pause. And Ethan has nothing to do with this decision. If you want to be angry at someone, be angry at me. I'm the one who said no. Ryan looked at Ethan one more time. The anger in it hadn't left, but something behind it had shifted. Less certainty, more hurt, which was in some ways harder to receive. 20 years, he said. Just that. Ethan held his ground and held his eyes. Yeah, he said quietly. I know. Ryan walked past them both and went out the front door, and they heard his truck start and pull away, the sound fading out down the gravel drive until the night swallowed it. The house was very quiet. Olivia stood in the hallway and pressed her fingers briefly against her eyes, 1 second, 2, then dropped her hand. She looked at Ethan with an expression that was exhausted and steady at the same time. He'll come back, Ethan said. I know. She didn't sound like she was trying to convince herself. She sounded like she genuinely knew it, because she knew her son, all of him, the difficult parts and the rest. He always comes back. He moved toward her, and she didn't step back, and he put his arms around her in the hallway of her house with the lights on and the silence of the property all around them, and she leaned into it for a moment. Not collapsed, not broken, just allowing herself the weight of another person's steadiness for a few seconds. She straightened, stepped back, looked at him. Stay for a little while? She asked. Yeah, he said. I'll stay. They went to the kitchen and she made tea. She also didn't really want, and they sat at the long wooden table with its years of nicks and scratches. And he didn't try to fix anything, and she didn't ask him to, and the night outside was flat and silent, and the East Corridor sat out there in the dark, 400 acres of original ground, and for now it was still hers. Ryan came back 2 days later. Not dramatically. No conversation announced in advance, no arrival speech. His truck was simply in the driveway when Olivia woke up Saturday morning, and when she came downstairs he was in the kitchen already, making coffee the way he'd made it since he was 15, too strong, the kind that left a film on the back of your teeth. He didn't apologize. She didn't ask him to. They sat at the table with their respective cups and talked about practical things. The south pasture drainage, the feed order that had come in short by 200 pounds, a repair needed on the horse trailer hitch. Olivia told Ethan about it on the phone that night. He's back, she said. We didn't talk about any of it. Do you need to? Right now? A pause. No. Right now I just need him to be here. Ethan understood that. Some things between parents and children ran below the level of words, and the talking could come later. And what mattered first was just the presence. What he didn't know was how Ryan being back would change the texture of things between the three of them. The answer turned out to be uncomfortably. Ryan was civil. He was never not civil, that wasn't his way. But there was a careful quality to his civility, a measured distance when Ethan came out to the ranch for a paddock repair job that week, that communicated volumes without saying anything that could be directly addressed. He found reasons to be in other parts of the property. He greeted Ethan when their paths crossed, kept it brief, moved on. Ethan did the same. Neither of them had the vocabulary yet for where they were, so they used the vocabulary they had. The language of men who gave each other space and waited. The youth writing program's next session was that Saturday. 12 kids this time, the oldest group, 10 and 11-year-olds who'd been through 2 previous sessions and were ready for more structured work. Olivia had been preparing for it all week. Ethan could tell by the quality of her phone calls, a focused, energized quality underneath the tiredness that the Ryan situation had produced. This was the thing that refilled her, and he'd come to understand the difference between when she was running on reserves and when she had something real to run on. He'd offered to be there. Not as part of the program, just available. "You don't have to," she said. "I know. Lily could come, if she wanted. She'll want." Saturday morning was clear and very warm, the flat Texas sky running a hard blue from edge to edge with no cloud in it anywhere. Ethan pulled into Sterling Ranch at 7:30, Lily beside him in the truck seat wearing the specific expression of a person en route to something she'd been thinking about for days. She had asked twice during the week whether Juniper would remember her. He'd said he didn't know. She'd found this answer acceptable, which told him she'd already made peace with either outcome. The ranch had a different energy with 12 children in it. It wasn't chaos. Olivia had organized it thoroughly, 3 ranch hands helping manage the horses, Sandra running the sign-in table, a woman named Beth from one of the schools acting as educational liaison. But there was a particular aliveness to the property that the children brought with them, their voices carrying across the paddock in the morning air, the horses responding to it with the alert attentiveness that large animals showed when small humans were around. Lily found Juniper within 4 minutes and stood at the paddock rail waiting with the same stillness she'd deployed last time. Juniper crossed to her in under 5. Ethan watched from 20 feet away and felt the specific warmth that his daughter produced in him at moments like this. Not pride exactly, though that was in it, but something more like recognition. She was going to be fine, this kid. She was already more than fine. Ryan was near the barn when Ethan arrived, talking to one of the hands about the trailer hitch repair. He glanced over when Ethan's truck came in, held the look for a moment, then went back to his conversation. Ethan got coffee from the table Sandra had set up, and found a spot near the fence where he could see the paddock without being in the middle of the activity. Olivia moved through the morning like she always moved through things that mattered to her, completely, without leftover attention for anything else. He watched her crouch down to talk to a boy who was clearly nervous, a slight kid with big eyes who was hanging back from the group with his arms crossed over his chest. She didn't rush him or push him. She crouched down to his level, said something Ethan couldn't hear from this distance, and pointed at one of the horses. Not Juniper, a smaller one, a brown and white paint named Biscuit, that one of the ranch hands had described to Lily as extremely medium-tempered in the best way. The boy looked at Biscuit for a long time. Then, slowly, he uncrossed his arms. Ethan looked down at his coffee. The morning ran 2.5 hours. He helped where he could, carrying water buckets, helping a ranch hand reset a paddock rail that had worked loose overnight, steadying a mounting block that was wobbling on uneven ground. Practical things. The kind of contribution that didn't require an introduction or an explanation. He was resetting a fence clip near the training ring when he became aware of Ryan standing nearby. He hadn't heard him approach. "That clip's been loose for a month," Ryan said. Not hostile, almost conversational. "Yeah, I can see that. Post shifted." Ethan pulled the clip and set it in the right position, drove it back in with 2 strikes. "Easy fix." Ryan stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, watching the kids in the paddock. "She's good at this," he said, meaning Olivia. "She is." "I forgot." Ryan's voice had a quality Ethan hadn't heard in it recently, something less defended. "How much she lights up with this kind of thing. She was always like that, even when we were kids. Had to be the one doing everything, running everything. Couldn't just watch." A pause. "I'm in Houston for 1.5 years, and I forget what she actually looks like when she's doing something she chose." Ethan didn't say anything to that. It wasn't a moment that wanted a response. "The East Corridor thing." Ryan said it like he was putting something heavy on a table to look at it. "I still think the numbers make sense." "I know you do, but I went about it wrong." He paused. doing the end run around her. He looked at the ground once, looked back up. My dad used to do that to her. Not with business stuff, with everything. Decide he knew better and act like it. She hated it. I know she hated it. A beat. I don't know why I thought it would land different coming from me. Ethan finished with the clip and straightened up. He looked at Ryan. This was the most honest he'd heard him since he'd gotten back. She knows why you did it, Ethan said. She's not confused about that. Ryan nodded slowly. That's almost worse. Yeah, Ethan said. It usually is. They stood there for a moment in the morning heat, not quite easy with each other yet, but closer to it than they'd been in weeks. An approach. Not a resolution. There was still too much sitting unaddressed for that, but the first evidence that resolution was possible. Across the paddock, Lily was leading Biscuit in a slow circle under the loose supervision of one of the ranch hands, her chin up and her back straight in the deliberate posture of a child who had been told how to sit on a horse and was applying the instruction with complete seriousness. Olivia watched from the rail, and her face had the expression he'd seen once before on a different Saturday, the one she'd had at the water trough, the one she hadn't wanted anyone to see. She caught Ethan's eye across the paddock. Just for a second. He didn't do anything demonstrative, just a small tilt of his chin. She turned back to the horses. Ryan had noticed. Ethan saw it in his peripheral vision, the slight shift of Ryan's attention to that exchange. He waited for something, a comment, a tightening. What he got instead was a long exhale through the nose, and then Ryan saying, quietly and not easily, "She's happy." Not a question. Yeah, Ethan said. She is. Ryan said nothing else. He walked back toward the barn, but his shoulders were different from when he'd come over, carrying something slightly lighter than before. The storm came in fast. That was the thing about Texas flatland weather in summer. It didn't always give you the afternoon building of clouds and the gradual escalation. Sometimes it just arrived, pressure dropping and temperature shifting in a window of 20 minutes. And by the time you looked up and thought that sky doesn't look right, you were already in it. They were in the cleanup phase, the children mostly back at the sign-in table for cookies and juice that Sandra had organized, horses being walked back to the barn by the ranch hands. The sky to the northwest had gone a specific greenish gray that anyone who'd grown up in Texas knew how to read. Ethan had been watching it for 10 minutes, recalibrating every time he thought it might break south and miss them. It didn't break south. The wind came first, the flat-out push of air ahead of a front that dropped the temperature 15 degrees in 4 minutes. Sandra had enough experience to start moving the children toward the covered equipment barn immediately, calling out to the parents who'd stayed to watch, and the school liaisons. The ranch hands were already moving the horses with practiced efficiency, reading the sky the same way Ethan was. Olivia was at the far paddock rail when it hit, helping a child unlatch a gate. Ethan was already moving by the time the first serious gust came through, not toward Olivia, who was fine and already heading for the barn, but toward the paddock where 3 horses had been left temporarily while the hands managed the main group back to the stalls. The 3 horses were young, younger than Juniper, less seasoned, not the horses that had been used with the children this morning. They'd been in the far paddock as a buffer, moved out of the way for the session. The storm sound and the pressure change hit all 3 of them at once, and he could see it from 50 yards away, ears flat, heads high, the muscle tension along the neck and shoulder that meant they were about to make a decision nobody was going to like. 2 of them bolted toward the back of the paddock, which was fine. That was just horses being horses. The third one, a big bay gelding named Colt that Ethan had seen around the property but never worked near, went the other direction, toward the gate that the child had just unlatched. It was open 4 inches, maybe 6. A 6-inch gap was nothing to a horse that had decided to move. Colt hit the latch with his chest, and the gate swung wide, and then he was through it and into the open corridor between paddocks, and the corridor opened onto the long gravel drive, and the long gravel drive had a cattle guard at the end of it. But beyond the cattle guard was the county road, and beyond the county road was the highway. Ethan was already running. He wasn't the closest person. One of the ranch hands, a man named Torres, was actually between him and Colt and got to the corridor entrance first. But Torres stepped into Colt's path with a lead rope and waving arms, which was the instinct but the wrong call on a horse that was already past rational. Colt shied sideways hard, knocked Torres off his feet and kept moving. Ethan didn't slow down. He cut left through the equipment yard, shorter route to the drive, came out ahead of Colt's line and stopped. And did the thing you did with a spooked horse that was moving fast and hadn't fully committed to blind panic yet. He dropped his arms, dropped his voice, turned sideways so he wasn't presenting as a threat, and said nothing, just stood there, sideways. Still. Colt's hooves hit the gravel hard and threw up dust, and the sound was wrong. Too much energy, too much speed, and Ethan didn't move. The horse slowed, not much, not enough, but the direction wavered. Still running, but questioning. Still moving, but not sure. Ethan stayed still. Let Colt come to him rather than closing the distance, which would have sent him sideways again, toward the cattle guard. He waited until the horse was close enough that he could reach the halter if he moved carefully, and then he moved carefully, one hand out, no sudden weight shift, talking in the low, steady murmur that didn't really use words at all. Colt stopped. Shaking, both of them, though for different reasons, and Ethan got his hand around the halter and held on and kept talking in the low murmur until the trembling in the horse's neck began to reduce and the eyes came down from their whites showing terror. Behind him, he heard boots on gravel, and then Torres was there, then two other hands, and someone produced a lead rope from somewhere, and Ethan held steady while it was clipped on, and then he took a breath that was deeper than he intended and stood up straight. The cattle guard was 40 feet behind them, the highway beyond that. He turned around. The children were all inside the equipment barn. He could see their faces at the wide door opening, several of them, watching with wide eyes. Sandra was there, one arm around a small girl's shoulders. The parents and liaisons were behind them. Olivia was standing 20 feet away on the drive, and she was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen before. Not relief exactly, that was in it, but something that ran deeper, the specific look of a person who had just understood something they'd already known but hadn't fully felt yet. She walked to him quickly and without ceremony put both hands briefly on his face, just for a second, checking him the way you checked someone when your rational mind knew they were fine, but your body needed to verify. He was fine. She dropped her hands. "The children?" he said. "All inside, no one got hurt." Her voice was very steady. Torres's wrist, he fell hard. "I saw. He should get it looked at." "Sandra's already on it." The rain arrived then, the real rain that had been behind the front wall, and it came down hard and immediate, the way summer storms did on flat land, like someone had simply turned it on. They ran for the equipment barn, which was already crowded and warm and smelled like wet children and horse and rain. Lily found him immediately, the way she always found him in crowds, her radar for his location apparently operating independently of sight. She grabbed his hand and held it with both of hers and said, "I saw you stop the horse." "Yeah," he said. "Were you scared?" He considered the honest answer. "Little bit." She nodded, processing. "But you stopped him." "Yeah." "Okay." She let go of one hand but held the other and leaned against him slightly, and he felt the weight and the warmth of her, and the rain hammered on the barn roof above them all. The storm ran 40 minutes. In those 40 minutes, with the rain coming down and the children gradually calming, and Torres's wrist being wrapped in a field dressing from Sandra's first aid kit, mild sprain, nothing broken, Ethan became aware at some point that Ryan was in the barn. He'd come in from the other entrance, from the horse side, and he was helping two of the hands settle the horses that had been brought in before the storm hit. He was good at it. Ryan had grown up with horses the same way Ethan had grown up with fence posts, and his hands on the lead ropes were practiced and calm. He was talking to a nervous mare in the low, steady voice that worked, the same voice Ethan had used on Colt. Ethan watched him for a moment from across the barn. At some point Ryan looked up and found him. He didn't look away immediately. He held it. And in his face was something that was different from every expression he'd had in the weeks since he'd come back. It was working through something. Ethan could see it actually moving, the way understanding moved through a person when they weren't resisting it. He didn't say anything. Neither did Ryan. The barn was too loud and too crowded for a conversation anyway. But something passed between them across that crowded, rain-loud space that was the beginning of something necessary, and they both felt it, and neither of them pretended otherwise. The cleanup took an hour after the rain cleared. Branches down, mud on the gravel drive, a section of temporary fencing that had been set up for the riding event had come loose from its stakes and scattered. Ethan worked alongside the ranch hands without being asked, lifting and resetting and shoveling mud, and Olivia worked beside him, and Ryan worked on the other side of the drive, doing the same things with the same unglamorous efficiency. At some point, Sandra brought out 3 bottles of water and distributed them without comment, and the 3 of them, Ethan, Olivia, Ryan, stood in the clearing afternoon light and drank their water and looked at the damage that had been done and the damage that had been prevented, and the specific quality of the silence between them had shifted again. "Good fencing, Walker," Ryan said eventually, looking at the paddock gate that had swung open, now relatched with a secondary clip he'd found in the equipment shed. Ethan looked at it. Double latching those gates was always on my list. Why wasn't it done? I kept getting called away for other things. A pause. It'll be done by Monday. Ryan nodded. He looked at his mother briefly, then back at the paddock. The East Corridor meeting, he said. Careful. I'll call them and tell them the timeline discussion is closed. Olivia looked at him. I still think the numbers make sense, Ryan said. For the record, I'm not going to pretend I don't. He paused. But it's your call, and I'm sorry I went around you. He said it looking at her directly, not performing the apology, just making it. That was wrong. She looked at her son for a moment with the specific expression of mothers who knew exactly who their children were, the whole complicated truth of them, and loved them anyway, which was a different kind of love than the easy kind. Thank you, she said simply. Ryan looked at Ethan then, and what was in his face was not resolved and not warm, and not yet anywhere near what it used to be between them. But it was honest, and honest was somewhere to start. You're good with horses, Ryan said. Grew up around them. I know. A beat. I know you did. He walked toward the barn to help Torres get his truck back out from the blocked east lot, and Ethan watched him go, and Olivia stood beside him watching too, and the afternoon light came back down over the property clean and direct after the rain, the way it always did out here, like the land just shook it off and went on. He means it, she said. I think he does. It doesn't fix everything. No, Ethan agreed, but it's a start. She was quiet for a moment. Lily was visible near the barn, helping one of the younger kids pour the remaining juice into a cup with the focused generosity of a child who had decided to be useful. Juniper was at the paddock fence nearby, watching the general activity with the serene detachment of an elderly horse who had seen everything and found most of it acceptable. Ethan. Olivia's voice was quieter now, the professional register put away. What you did today? Anybody would have... Don't! She turned to look at him. Don't do the thing where you make it small. You ran toward a panicked horse on a gravel drive with a highway 40 feet away, with my daughter's riding program students watching from the doorway. Her voice was steady and direct. That's not nothing. Don't make it nothing. He held her eyes. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. They stood in the afternoon quiet of the property, rain-washed, mud-smelling, the horses settling, the children's voices coming out of the barn as the families started gathering belongings and heading toward cars. Lily looked up from across the yard and found his face and gave him the small, satisfied nod of a person who had had a good day and was ready to tell him about it in full detail on the drive home. His daughter, his work, this woman beside him. The town had opinions. Ryan had his own road to walk. The East Corridor sat out there intact, original ground, his great-grandfather's plow marks in the soil 40 years deep. None of it was clean, none of it was resolved. But it was real, all of it, and real things were what you could actually build on. He'd been building all his life. He knew how. The week after the storm was the quietest stretch Ethan had known in months. Not quiet in the way of absence. There was still work, still Lily, still the ordinary machinery of a life that didn't pause for anyone's emotional reckoning. He had 3 jobs that week, including a full pasture partition that ran 2 long days in the flat heat. He made Lily's lunches and signed her permission slip for a field trip, and sat through 20 minutes of her explaining, with great seriousness, the precise hierarchy of dinosaurs she found interesting and why the ones her friend Jake preferred were objectively less impressive. He called his mother on Wednesday like he always did and deflected her questions about Olivia with the same skill he'd been developing for months, though he suspected his mother's tolerance for deflection was running thin. Ordinary life. He'd always been good at ordinary life, understood its value in a way that people who'd had it easy sometimes didn't, that the ordinary days were the actual days, that the life you built in between the dramatic moments was the life you were actually living. But something had shifted in him after the storm, something he couldn't attribute entirely to the horse, or to Ryan's slow, effortful cracking open, or to the way Olivia had put both hands on his face and checked that he was real. It was the accumulation of everything, finally weighing enough to tip something over from uncertain to certain. He knew what he felt. He'd known for a while. What he'd been circling was not the feeling, but the question of whether the feeling was wise, whether the gap between their lives was a real obstacle or a thing that other people made more important than it was. By Thursday, he'd settled it. The gap was real. It would always be real. And it didn't matter the way he'd worried it might, because what was on both sides of the gap had chosen to look across it anyway. He drove out to Sterling Ranch on Friday afternoon with no job to justify the trip. Just drove out. Olivia's car was at the house. He parked and knocked, and she opened the door in the particular way of someone who'd been expecting him without knowing they were expecting him. "No repair job?" she said. "No," he said. "Just came." She stepped back to let him in, and something in her expression was easier than it had been in weeks, like a machinery that had been running too tight had finally been given permission to breathe. They sat on the back porch in the late afternoon heat, with the property spreading out in front of them, the east pasture going gold in the angle of the sun, juniper visible as a slow brown shape near the water trough. Neither of them rushed the conversation. That was one of the things he'd come to value about how they were together. Neither of them needed to fill the silence with something that hadn't arrived yet. "Ryan called the developers," she said eventually, "on Wednesday. Told them the East Corridor is not available." "How'd they take it?" "About how you'd expect. They asked if the north section was on the table." A pause. "It's not." He nodded. "How did Ryan take making that call?" She considered this honestly. He was frustrated. He's still frustrated. He thinks I'm choosing legacy over financial sense, and he's not entirely wrong about the numbers. She looked out at the pasture. "But he made the call. That's not nothing for Ryan." "No," Ethan agreed. "It's not. He and I had a real conversation the night before he did it." She said it carefully, like she was still handling it, the way you handled something that was still healing. The kind we haven't had in a long time, about what happened after Gerald died, about how I managed things, about the writing program, about... She stopped. "About you." He looked at her. "He asked me directly," she said, "what this is. Between us." She met his eyes. "I told him I loved you." The words sat in the afternoon air between them, and he felt them the way you felt something that was both surprising and completely expected, like the last piece of something clicking in, the thing that made the shape finally make sense. "That's the first time either of us has said that," he said. "I know." She held his gaze. Steady, the way she was always steady, but with something open in it. "I meant to say it to you first. It came out to Ryan instead, which is very on brand for how my life goes." He reached over and took her hand. Her fingers were calloused from fence work and horse halters, which he'd noticed the first week and thought about ever since. The gap between what people assumed about her and what her hands actually said. "I love you," he said. Not dramatically, just the way true things sounded when you finally stopped finding reasons not to say them. "Have for a while." She exhaled once, like she'd been holding something. "Yeah," she said. "Same." They sat like that for a while, hands together on the arm of the porch chair, the property going golden in front of them, the heat softening toward evening. It wasn't a fairy tale moment. There were still things unresolved. Ryan was still carrying ambivalence. The town was still watching and talking. Her life and his life were still different in ways that would require constant and genuine navigation. None of that had disappeared. But it was real, and it was chosen, and those two things together were more than most people got. Ryan came home, genuinely home, not just staying at the ranch while he processed, over the following weeks in a way that was gradual and unglamorous and more real because of it. He wasn't transformed. That wasn't how Ryan worked, and it wasn't how people worked in general, the overnight conversion from resistant to accepting. What happened instead was incremental. A conversation here, a shared afternoon of fence work there, a Sunday morning where Ethan brought Lily out and Ryan ended up teaching her how to check a hitch latch properly, standing in the gravel with a child on his hip level, talking her through it with the patient specificity he'd always had for anything mechanical. Lily had no complicated feelings about Ryan Sterling. She had assessed him on their first extended meeting and decided he was acceptable, primarily on the basis that he knew the actual names of horse breeds she'd been unable to get Ethan to learn, and that he laughed at her jokes without explaining why they were funny, which was her primary criterion for the quality of an adult. She called him Ryan, not Mr. Sterling, without being told she could, because she'd learned from her father that you read the room. Ethan watched Ryan with his daughter one Sunday afternoon. Not obviously, not in a way that made anything of it, and felt the quiet, complicated gratitude of seeing someone he'd cared about for 20 years choosing, piece by piece, to be better than the position he'd taken. Ryan would probably never completely let go of the financial argument about the East Corridor. He'd probably always carry some residue of skepticism about Ethan's presence in his mother's life. Those things didn't vanish because you decided to do better. But he was doing better, and he was doing it visibly and without being asked. That counted for something. In Ethan's experience, it counted for a lot. The town's conversation about them never fully stopped, but it changed in character. This was also how small towns worked. The initial churn of gossip had an energy to it, a novelty, and when the novelty wore off and the situation didn't explode the way people had half expected, the conversation shifted from speculation to something more like commentary, and eventually from commentary to just the low-level background noise of a place processing a new reality. May Calloway reported to Ethan at the diner counter one morning. She had appointed herself an informal dispatcher of community sentiment, which he'd come to appreciate, that the general feeling is settling. He asked what that meant. She stirred her coffee and said, "People who were saying things have run out of new things to say. That's usually how it ends." He thanked her. "My granddaughter wants to go back to the writing program in fall," May added. "That's what Olivia Sterling should know. Whatever else people are saying, they're sending their grandkids back." He passed it along. Olivia's response was to sit down and immediately email the school liaisons about fall scheduling, which was exactly the kind of person she was. His mother met Olivia for the first time on a Sunday in late July, at a barbecue that Ethan's friend Marcus had organized with the specificity of someone who understood that the longer you delayed introducing two important women in a person's life, the more it became a thing, and the more it became a thing, the worse the eventual meeting was going to be. Marcus had 4 children and a wife who had been managing family dynamics for 15 years and knew this as operational fact. The barbecue was in Marcus's backyard, noisy and hot and thoroughly unromantic, which was exactly right. Ethan's mother, a compact, direct woman named Ruth, who had been a carpenter until her knees went and was now primarily occupied with her vegetable garden and her opinions, looked at Olivia Sterling for about 90 seconds before apparently deciding something, and then spoke to her for the next 2 hours with the same direct energy she brought to everything, asking her about the ranch and the writing program and what she thought about the soil quality out in the East County, which Ruth had strong views on. Olivia held her own, which Ethan had known she would. His mother liked her, which he had hoped she would. The two of them ended up in adjacent lawn chairs discussing drainage issues with the focused intensity of people who had found an unexpected point of genuine contact, and Ethan stood across the yard watching this happen with a feeling that was warm and slightly overwhelming and entirely worth it. Lily, for her part, had spent the whole barbecue trying to get Marcus's youngest son to learn her method for the Tornado Vortex project, with mixed results. The real conversation with Ryan happened in September, 7 weeks after the storm. It wasn't planned. Ethan had come out to the ranch on a Tuesday to look at a gate system near the north paddock that needed reworking, and Ryan was there, working on the trailer hitch repair he'd been putting off since before the storm. They worked in proximity for an hour without much conversation. Comfortable enough silence, not hostile, just two people doing separate work in the same space. Then Ryan set down his wrench and said, without looking up, "I want to say something and I need you to let me finish before you respond." Ethan set down his wire cutter. "Okay." Ryan picked up a rag and wiped his hands with the specific focus of someone who needed something to do with their hands while they said something difficult. "The stuff I said to you at the auction lot, about taking advantage of her, about the money thing." He stopped, wiped the wrench instead of his hands. "I don't actually believe that about you. I don't think I ever really did." Ethan waited because Ryan had asked him to. "I was scared," Ryan said. "That's the honest version. I'd been gone for 3 years. I'd missed things. I came back and suddenly there's this whole other thing happening in my mother's life and I wasn't part of it. and I couldn't control it, and I... He stopped again, set the wrench down. I took it out on you because it was easier than taking it out on what was actually bothering me. Which was? Ryan looked at him finally. That she was fine without me. That she'd been fine without me the whole time I was gone, and I'd convinced myself she needed me more than she did. A pause. My dad's death hit her hard, harder than she showed, and I told myself I needed to go to Houston. I needed to build my own thing. She'd be okay. And she was okay. She was more than okay. But somewhere in the back of my head I needed to believe she needed rescuing, because it made my being gone feel less like abandonment. The yard was quiet. A horse moved in the paddock. The afternoon heat sat flat and honest over everything. And then you showed up, Ryan said. This guy she didn't need to be rescued by. This guy she just chose, because she wanted to. He exhaled. That was harder to deal with than I expected. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, you weren't abandoning her. You know that. I know it now. A pause. I wasn't sure of it then. Ryan. Ethan chose the words carefully because they mattered. You came back. You made the call to the developers. You fixed the hitch. He gestured at the trailer. You taught my daughter how to check a latch. None of that is the behavior of someone who abandoned their family. Ryan made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Your daughter is terrifying, by the way. She informed me yesterday that I was checking the tire pressure wrong. Was she right? A pause. Yeah, Ryan said. She was right. They stayed in the yard another moment, the 20 years between them present in the air. All the fence work, and the truck arguments and the afternoons that didn't mean anything at the time and meant everything in retrospect. I'm not going to tell you I'm completely fine with it, Ryan said. That'd be a lie. There are still days where I think about it and I feel something I can't fully name. He looked at the property, the fence line stretching east in the afternoon light. But she's happy, and you're... He seemed to weigh something. You're still you. That hasn't changed. No, Ethan said. It hasn't. Ryan picked the wrench back up. Okay, he said, like a door closing gently on a room that had needed airing for a long time. Okay, Ethan said. They went back to work. The hitch got fixed. The gate system got reworked. By 4 o'clock, the whole north end of the property had 3 new latch mechanisms that Lily would theoretically not be able to find fault with. And the afternoon light was going amber over the pasture in the specific way it had out here that Ethan had come to think of as his, somehow, a thing he'd seen enough times to own a piece of. October brought cooler mornings and the end of the summer heat that had sat over the county like a judgment since June. The youth riding program's fall session started with 14 kids, 2 more than the summer session, one of whom was a boy from Lily's school who had heard about it from Lily directly and asked his mother to sign him up. Ethan sat on the paddock rail on the first Saturday morning of the fall session and watched his daughter lead a smaller boy up to Biscuit the paint horse, talking the whole time in a low, patient voice. You have to wait for her to come to you, Lily was saying. You can't rush it. She has to decide. The boy looked nervous, and Lily looked steadier than a 9-year-old had any real right to look. And Ethan thought about Olivia saying she's got something in the gray morning of that second session, and thought about how much had happened since that morning, and felt the particular quality of time that only arrived when you were on the other side of something and could see the shape of it. Olivia came and stood beside him at the rail. She'd been on the phone. There was always something, and she had the look of someone who'd just concluded a conversation that had taken 20 minutes longer than it should have. Board call, she said. Quarterly? How was it? Fine. Better than it used to be. She leaned on the rail. Less time spent on people testing whether I know what I'm doing. What changed? 4 years of results. She glanced at him. And I stopped being as polite about it. He smiled at the paddock. Lily had successfully gotten her classmate within 2 feet of Biscuit. The horse lowered her head, curious. I want to show you something, Olivia said, when the session's done. He looked at her. She was watching the paddock, not him, but there was something deliberate in how she'd said it. Okay, he said. She drove him out to the east corridor after the session, the 2 of them in her truck, the gravel road giving way to the older dirt track that ran along the original property boundary. He'd been out to this section only once, briefly, to check a drainage question months ago. It looked different in the October light. The grass lower after the dry summer, the color gone to brown and amber, but the land itself had a quality to it that you felt before you could name it: old, used, cared for. She stopped the truck at the far end of the track and got out, and he followed, and they stood at the edge of the east corridor with 400 acres of original sterling ground in front of them, and the sky doing its enormous Texas thing overhead, the blue going deep in the afternoon. My great-grandfather planted those trees, she said, pointing at a line of post oaks along the eastern boundary. 1952. Said a fence line without trees was just wire making a point. He looked at the trees. They were large, the kind of large that took 70 years to accumulate. Gerald used to bring me out here on Sunday mornings, she said. Before church, before everything. Just the two of us. He'd drive the boundary and name every section. Not romantically, just matter-of-factly. That's where the drainage shifts. That's where your grandfather found the water line. Just information, things he needed to pass on. She paused. I think I understood it as history, but not as responsibility, until after he died and I was standing in a lawyer's office signing things. Ethan listened. I almost sold it, she said. Not because of Ryan. Before Ryan came back. There was a quarter where the ranch was running at a loss, and I had to look at every option on the table, and the east corridor was on the table. She turned to face him. I stood out here by myself one afternoon, and I walked the boundary, and I thought about what my father would have told me. And what I kept hearing in my head wasn't something noble or grand. It was just, it's still yours if you don't sell it. That simple. She almost smiled. My father was not a sentimental man. Practical, Ethan said. Completely practical. He just happened to know the price of some things couldn't be paid back. He looked at the post oaks along the fence line. 70 years of standing, weathering, growing outward. They'd been saplings when Eisenhower was president. They'd been through every drought and storm this land had produced, and they were still here, roots going down into the soil deep enough to stay. I'm not going anywhere, Olivia said. She said it the way she said things she'd worked through thoroughly and come out the other side of, not as reassurance, but as statement. I've thought about this carefully. The money piece, the town piece, Ryan, all of it. I'm clear. I know you are, he said. I need to know you are too. She met his eyes directly. Not wondering, not waiting to see how it plays out, actually clear. He held her gaze. I've been clear since that first Friday, he said. Since you sat on my tailgate and asked me if I liked my work. Since you told me about the girl who put her hand out to Juniper. He paused. I've been trying to figure out how to say it without sounding like more than I am. You're enough, she said. Flat, certain. Stop trying to be less. He took that in. It was the kind of thing that required time to settle properly. He let it settle. Okay, he said. Okay, she said, and the word between them now had a long history attached to it. Every conversation it had closed and opened, and they both felt that history, and neither of them thought it needed naming. She took his hand, and they stood at the edge of the east corridor in the October afternoon with the post oaks along the fence line and the land going out in every direction, and the sky overhead being enormous in the specific way that Texas sky was enormous, which was less about the size of it and more about the fact that it made you feel like you were standing somewhere that mattered. He thought about the fence along the highway, the cedar posts he'd set in concrete, the rail that matched Gerald's original work, the corner bracing that would hold through whatever came. He thought about the drainage below the surface, the culvert that had shifted, the way the ground moved over time in ways you couldn't always see from above. He thought about what it meant to build something that lasted. Not the performance of building, not the appearance of permanence, but the actual work, going deep, choosing materials that could take weather, being honest about what was wrong before you covered it over. He'd been doing that work his whole life. He just hadn't always applied it to the right places. The gossip eventually became something quieter, the way water that has been moving fast will settle when it finds its level. There was always going to be a version of this story that the town told about the billionaire and the fence repairman, and that version was always going to flatten things that didn't fit the shape of a simple story. That was all right. You couldn't control what a town did with its material. You could only know what was true and live accordingly. What was true? Ethan Walker drove out to Sterling Ranch 3 or 4 times a week, not always for work. What was true? Lily had started calling Juniper my horse with the specific possessiveness of a child who has decided something is hers, and Olivia had not corrected her, which meant Lily had correctly assessed the situation. What was true? Ryan Sterling was still working through his own complicated interior accounting, still had days where something in his face went tight when he saw his mother and Ethan together, but also had days where he and Ethan worked side by side on the property with a rhythm that remembered 20 years even when it was being careful. Some things healed in seasons, not in moments. That was all right too. What was true? Ethan had dinner at the ranch on a Sunday in late October with Olivia and Ryan and Lupe's food, and Lily talking uninterrupted for most of the meal about various topics including but not limited to the tornado vortex, improved fourth iteration, the relative merits of different horse personalities, a conflict at school involving a dodgeball incident she'd clearly been the architect of, but was narrating from a position of pure victimhood, and her evolving thoughts on the East Corridor trees, which she had apparently decided were old enough to have feelings. Ryan, to his credit, engaged with the tree feelings question with complete seriousness. "What kind of feelings?" he asked. "Like general emotions or specific ones?" Lily considered this. "Mostly patient ones," she said, "but also maybe a little smug." "That tracks," Ryan said. "Old trees are smug. It's earned." Ethan looked at the table, the nicked wood, the food, Lily's elbows violating the surface protocol as always, Olivia's hand loose on her coffee cup, Ryan cutting his food with the focused precision he brought to small physical tasks. The ordinary machinery of people sharing a table, imperfect and alive, nothing resolved completely, everything still in process. He thought, this is what you're actually building, not the grand version. This. November came in with cold mornings, and the smell of wood smoke from the properties to the north where people burned cedar, and Ethan drove to Sterling Ranch on a Tuesday that was, for the first time in months, neither a job, nor a crisis, nor an occasion. Just a Tuesday. He parked at the gate and walked the east fence line, the way he hadn't walked it since the original repair job, checking the posts, checking the rail, checking the concrete footings at the corners. All of it holding. The cedar had weathered to a silver gray that matched the older sections Gerald had put in 30 years before, the way good material eventually settled into the landscape it was meant for. He got to the corner post nearest the highway, the one where the original damage had been worst, where the drainage had failed, where he'd spent the first morning of his life on this property figuring out what needed to be done, and stood there for a while. The highway stretched empty in both directions. Ahawk was working the thermal over the east pasture, riding circles without effort. He heard Olivia's boots on the dry grass before he heard her voice, and he didn't turn around yet. "You walked the whole line?" she said. "Habit," he said. She came up beside him and looked at the fence post the same way he was looking at it. "Still good?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "It's still good." They stood at the post where everything had started. A damaged fence on a Tuesday morning, a storm that had moved the ground, a woman who brought water and asked the right questions. And the sky above the flatland was enormous and clear, and the east corridor spread out behind them full of post oaks that were 70 years old and smug about it. And somewhere across the property, Lily's voice was audible, probably explaining something to a horse that didn't need the explanation and didn't mind it. He put his arm around her and she leaned into it, the two of them standing at a cedar fence post in the November morning, not performing anything, not pretending anything, not trying to be more or less than what they were. Here's what he understood now, in a way he hadn't when this started. Love was not a feeling that arrived and then either stayed or left. It was more like the work of fence setting. You had to choose the material, you had to go deep enough. You had to be honest about the ground conditions before you started. You had to be willing to address the drainage problem and not just reset the post and hope for the best. You had to check your work and come back after the storms and walk the line and make sure it was still holding. And sometimes, not always, not often enough to take for granted, you set the post in the right place, at the right depth, in material that was honest and durable, and it held. Not perfectly, not forever without maintenance, but genuinely, the way things held when they were built right. He'd spent his whole life building things that other people asked for and needed and paid for. That was the work, and he loved it. But this, the thing that had started on a damaged fence line and moved through arguments and storms, and his daughter's hand on an old horse's neck, and a kitchen table at midnight, and a man working through his own grief in a barn full of frightened horses, this was the thing he was building for himself. He wasn't going to let it go. Olivia turned her head and looked at him, and he looked back, and between them was the specific quiet of two people who had finished explaining themselves and had simply decided. The fence line ran straight and true in both directions. The hawk came down out of the thermal and crossed the highway heading east, and the morning held.